Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I have a special guest again on today because he is about to publish his new book. Uh, and you have met him before, the one and only Jamie Mustard.
Hey.
I'll just take a quick introduction because we are here to talk about your book called Child X, a memoir of slavery, poverty, celebrity, and Scientology.
Yeah.
And what I was thinking was that we have talked about it before, that book about children in Scientology should have been the first book that
Yeah,
was
and
written.
when I say that, I'm not saying it to say it. I say it because I truly believe it. You know, we live in Western culture, right? Like we think with protecting the most vulnerable parts of our population first. And there's been some good books that have addressed it. I've read parts of Catherine's book, and there's been really good books that have addressed it. But something that tries to examine and understand what this phenomenon was like for us early generations of kids that grew up as children of Hubbard's Inner Navy, and also something that explains what the existential I don't know if I want, the existential effect that this has on kids, no matter whether they're in the Inner Navy or not, right? You grew up in the, what they call the Sea Organization or the Inner Navy, where they're the hardcore that run that kind of run the show. Even the kids that grow outside of that, the constructs that you're being hit with at a very young age in terms of emotion being frowned upon, being told about, concepts of karma, of past lives. Something bad happens to you, you quote pulled it in. Anything bad happens to you, you caused it. Being told that you're not a child, but a trillion-year-old fallen god. Are these things just stories? Are they no big deal, or are these things something that can affect the psyche and development of a human being? Right. This is what what I tried to write. I think that a lot of people won't understand, may not, what's the word? It's not going to be like other things that have written, and a book is not, a book is just a set of ideas, and it's a package in which you can convey ideas. So I really tried to use artistry to convey the existential part of what this experience is. And just try to speak for, and again, I say this with humility, so many of the kids that I grew up with are not around anymore. So try to speak for the kids that aren't around anymore to speak for themselves.
Yes. My question was a little bit of a two-parter. I didn't get to finish it. So what I wanted to ask was, why now? Why did you feel that this was the right time to do it? And what, I will use it in a positive sense now, what triggered you into writing this book now?
God. Well, it's a great question because I had vowed to never write it. My experience, maybe everyone's experience is different depending on what generation they're from, and what geography they're in. What's amazing about it is that we can all have such different experiences, but they're universally traumatic. Right? Yeah. That's an interesting thing. I think that I don't think I had, until I finished this thing, I don't think I had a sense of how much this thing had a hold on me. These ideas of being responsible for every single thing that happens to me, having the pressure to save the world. You can laugh at those things, but when those things are put on you in a very, very intense way, when you believe in the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus and things like that, it gets it gets into you. And I've carried, I lived in kind of a deep poverty. I lived in probably one of the more poorer generations of it, growing up in Los Angeles in the 70s and 80s. And so there was a lot of things that happened to me in terms of the degradation of my body, the degradation of my existence. And that stuff was, created a lot of shame. What I've learned is that it's not my shame to carry, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of it has to do with just I think the fact that there was a protest movement, the fact that I don't know, I was going to do this other long-term project and it didn't go. It was kind of the circumstances of life too. I was going to do another long-term project and it fell through. And it was like, okay, what's my next long-term project? Because I could write about almost anything. And it was just kind of, I almost want to say instinctual.
Yeah.
It was time. I wasn't really, it really wasn't for me. It was for, it was really for all these kids that I grew up with. And, but it's ended up doing things to me.
Yeah.
I hope that wasn't a too vague of an answer, Mirjam.
No, I think that was a perfect answer.
Okay.
And you have previously talked a little bit about your early years or even months, how you were grown inside the inner navy of the organization called Scientology. And the only closest story I can think of that is a little bit similar to yours is actually Spanky Taylor's recollection of her picking up her child from care, which was displayed on Going Clear.
Yeah.
Movie.
Yeah, I know her. I know Spanky. I consider, I would have been a kid in that nursery around that time, right? So, I've talked about this a little bit, but I think we should recover whatever ground we want to, because this is me post this thing being done.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
spending a year and a half, 7 days a week, kind of grinding on some stuff that I never really wanted to look at. I don't know that 4 months ago, I was doing a very good job of kind of communicating, right? Really,
Okay.
right? So I think, feel free to recover stuff, because I feel like this is me, kind of starting to have a little bit of perspective.
Okay. So basically the structure of the book, I haven't read it yet. I haven't even gotten an excerpt of it. So I'm going on what I can find online and what it says on the cover. So it says it's a memoir. So will it cover?
Yeah, let's go back to your first question. So you brought up the Spanky Taylor thing. So I was taken as an infant from the hospital. This stuff is kind of hard to believe, right? I think Johnny Tack was giving me a quote from Hubbard that said something like, if we're too incredible, we'll be unbelievable. So it's hard for people to believe this, but I went straight from the hospital to this place near downtown Los Angeles, a few blocks from the Rampart police station, right behind the original Tommy's Burgers. There was a place where all the babies went on Beacon Street, and Scientology, Hubbard's thing is full of all sorts of fancy names for weird things or gross things, but the place that this was called was the Asho Day House, right? Which should have been like I don't know why all the kids were at this, organization, but there was like a couple of 2 or 3 caretakers there, and there was dozens of babies. So no human touch. There are no baby pictures of me. I think there was one Polaroid that my grandmother took on a visit. I'm not sure where that is. So, that's right there for people that think that this story sounds too incredible to believe, especially with the life that I have now. Produce a baby picture. There are none, because there were no adults, there was no people, there were no parents around to take those pictures. And when I first did an interview a year and a half ago, there was a woman who was my caretaker. She was about 7 or 8 years old when I was an infant at that building in downtown Los Angeles, what I call a baby machine. And the idea is you're not really, Hubbard's organization is about getting work done. So a blob baby can't get a lot of work done. So the idea is, some people will ask me, well, would you think they intentionally did this to you? And I actually don't. I think that they were just so busy that they kind of looked at us like, okay, this guy will be useful in 12 years. So we're going to put them, we're going to pen them in a little slum orphanage over here, and they can grow their bodies because we've all lived billions of lifetimes. And then when their bodies are big enough to work, then they'll come over and they'll start getting shit done for us. And I think really that was the mentality. This woman reached out to me. She saw me in an interview. She had been my caretaker, and she was able to fill in. Like, I have really early memories. I have baby memories in a way that other people don't. But so she was able to confirm some of those memories, and then also fill in a lot of gaps that I had, because and it was crazy. You have this woman who was a kid who was my caretaker for a few months or 6 months in this environment, and she couldn't get me out of her head for over 40 years. She had thought about me. I mean, we're talking about a 7-year-old girl, right? So that's how it all started, and it was a crucible. I mean, I can say that I was born and I went into this thing. You're unaware, and I was about to go on a 20-year battle. But I didn't know that. I thought I was just, existing. So we went from there, where I have limited memories, but memories, and to 2 to 3 years later, to this place called the Melrose Building, which was in a kind of Mexican slum, actually not far from Paramount Studios in Los Angeles. That's the interesting thing about LA. You can have like multi-million-dollar homes, and then 3 blocks later have slums. And so that building was really probably the worst part of it. This was before Big Blue, before we moved in there. And that was just, stacked on bunks, 3 high, militaristic structure, extreme poverty, no bed sheets, congealed oily mattresses, no parents, or, I would see my mother once a week or something, sometimes less. Sometimes then she went away for training for a year and a half. So you're living in this extreme poverty. It's very much Lord of the Flies with these kids, because you have this kind of militaristic structure of the cadet org. And it is there's no air conditioning. We play on a hot, rotting concrete patch exposed to the sun. And it's a kind of poverty with roaches and just a tremendous amount of emotional pressure on a small child. And then you're being given this doctrine. So I hope I didn't go on too long there, but I'm trying to.
No. I'm just wondering, did you feel like you were missing something, that you were missing affection from your parents, or missing a regular life? Or did you even have an idea what a so-called regular life could be like?
Eventually I went numb. I had a grandmother that we used to go visit every couple of years, and I'd go to her place, which was kind of nicer outside of New York City. And you would think that I would go in there and go, wow, look at this regular life that I could have, right? That was not really how I processed it at all. The way that I processed it was, okay, I'm here for 2 weeks. And the minute I would get there, or a week or whatever it was, all I would be thinking about was the dread of going back.
Yeah.
So I couldn't even enjoy it.
Okay.
But she was very kind. And, but yes, I mean, it's such a great question, and I don't write about this. Maybe I do. I had a feeling something was wrong. I remember having a feeling when I was 5 or 6 years old, before we moved to Big Blue, that the stork had dropped me off at the wrong place. Like, I'm not supposed to be here.
Yeah.
I remember having that kind of as an intrinsic feeling, as far as anxiety is concerned. I had a pressurized anxiety that was so intense in my body from my earliest memory, that I didn't imagine that you didn't feel that way. Like, anxiety as an extreme, constant, chronic feeling was like a limb, like an arm. It was just real to me as an arm. So the answer is, I had a feeling something was wrong, but I had a 5-year-old brain, a 3-year-old brain, a 4-year-old brain, and it was the only world I know. It was a bubble, right? You know, you're living in this world and you're doing hip hip hooray, and there's a big organization board in this thing, and then there was just a lot of brutalities, right? You know, if there were public punishments that the head of they call this thing the cadet org. There's a lot of fancy terms, but really it was a slum office in the Melrose building where this 17-year-old kid reaped violence onto children, and it was on orders, right? So it's a really bizarre. And then there's been a number of suicides. I found out recently, when I came out a year and a half ago, that one of my close friends from around that time, he came maybe a little later, had died of a drug overdose. And you know, one of the things that I want just Scientology to know, and when they hear me say this, how they're going to take it is, he's just really good at being covertly hostile. There's a lot of thought stopping mechanisms. So if I ever sound convincing, and somebody from Hubbard's organization, from Scientology, is watching this, if I ever sound sincere or convincing, they have a mechanism in place where anybody that's convincing that they know is bad because they're against them is just inherently evil, and they call that covert hostility. So if they were watching me and I started to sound sincere, this mechanism will kick in, and they'll go, oh, he's just really, really good at being covertly hostile, which is really, really low on their emotional scale of existence. And so, but I will say this with that in mind, I mean this sincerely. I'm not being covertly hostile. Okay, I'm being overtly offended. I'm being overtly resentful. Okay. I'm not like trying. I don't feel this thing. I mean, I hate to, it's kind of a weird thing. I don't have this like passion when I get up in the morning to destroy Scientology. I'm not trying to destroy Scientology. That's not what this is about for me. I want the abuses to end. It's a punishment culture where people snitch on each other, and there's all these ethics orders, and there's all these, your PTS, your SP, you're in lower conditions, you're upstat, you're downstat. It's a judgment and a punishment culture. And I don't want adults or children subject to these things. And so it's more like I want the abuses to stop.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And it's not about trying to hurt you. It's about this very, very extreme, exotic thing happened to me where I didn't go to school my whole life until I was 20. I mean, we went for a couple of years in Eugene, but I was warehousing myself, getting Fs because I didn't have glasses and I hadn't been to school before that. I maybe went to a couple months of Lockwood Elementary School, but at 20 years old, when I went out of there, I didn't know how to use a comma. I wrote at a 4-year-old level, maybe. I mean, I understood characters. I could read at a high level from studying the doctrine. Okay. But to me, it's about owning my story and telling what happened for the kids that aren't around to tell it. I don't feel like that has to be met with hostility, Mirjam. No. I feel like that could be met with a phone call saying, what's your beef? Well, you know, I didn't get educated my whole life. I was put in this physically and psychologically crushing environment, and a lot of my friends are dead, and I've had to fight for survival, you know? Yeah. Oh, well, shit, you know, we've looked at that and we agree that the kids were neglected and we don't feel good about that. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up an educational fund to help you guys remediate your education, and we're going to give you grants to help you start businesses, and we're going to help you, whether you want to be part of the organization or not. Like, it doesn't have to be met with hostility. You know, the Catholic Church got found to be doing bad things. The Hubbard's organization has now banned the re-education camp because the law is against it, right? So they do make changes. Yeah. But you know, I'm not against them. I'm for one of the things, and this is, maybe you could help me, be my therapist for a second. Okay?
I'll try.
I did not realize how, basically, I always knew that if I told this story, that they would automatically label me their enemy. I'm not their enemy. Okay. I never was going to tell the story, mostly because I have so much pain and shame connected to it when it would come up in even their counseling or their, you know, interviews with me, it was like a serpent came out of me from all of the pain. So I didn't want to touch it, and I just put it away in a place where I wouldn't touch it. I feel like now that the story's told, I didn't realize how much it was affecting the way that I was interacting with the world, denying that I'd been through this thing, trying to pretend like I hadn't been through this thing, basically having, living a very false sense of the past. And I think that it's very necessary if you want to master yourself, you have to master your story.
Yeah.
And I was in complete denial of my story. So I'm curious what you think about that. Like, I'm not against them. I'm standing up for me, and there's a difference.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I'm actually was thinking about this. You probably heard before these two statements. First of all, Scientologists are, in the end of the day, good people that are trying to do good.
Not all of them, but a lot of them. When I think about the majority of people that I think about that I miss, that I love, are really good. There's a few people, obviously bad things happen. It doesn't happen by accident. Like there are people that allow bad to go on.
Yeah,
What did Martin
of course. But if we do a heavy generalization, and you have probably heard this before. And the second one is that when someone leaves Scientology, you want to put it behind you. You want to just leave it behind and continue on your life. And I have this analogy from my friend who left Scientology, who said, when I left, I wanted to just forgive them and forget it. But he did find out it was not that easy because
So a couple things I'd say about that. One of the ways that I was able to transcend it to the degree that I have, I don't know that I'll ever completely transcend it, right? I probably said this before, but it's kind of like an open wound, right?
Yeah.
Is at 7 years old, I was this is all covered in the book. I was by myself taking the bus in Hollywood and Los Angeles. And there were periods where I was left alone and I took the bus and I saw movies on Hollywood Boulevard. I would watch a movie all day, over and over and over again. And I kind of tried to frame my life like an adventure, like a quest, like I saw in the movies, right? And I give examples of this, right? So I had a really rich fantasy life trying to, because I was, by myself in these dorms. I didn't have parents. I was trying to find a way to feel okay. And movies kind of calm my nervous system down. They gave me a mental relief for a brief
escapism.
Yeah, escapism. But they also showed me these characters that where everything was against them, and they still managed to come out the end. So I think that if I hadn't been in Hollywood and I hadn't been able to do that, also when we moved to Big Blue, I was there right when we moved in, right? So and the hospital hadn't been totally cleared out, and we're little kids, and they're and we're exploring these tunnels that go under the Big Blue and explore. The animal cages were still behind where the advanced division is now, and we would go into these locked doors and find all of these test tubes and things that were left over by the hospital. And as young kids, this was like an incredible adventure. So it's not all a complete bummer story. There's I had a very powerful life going on inside my head that allowed me to kind of cope with it. I do find, so, and then, I was in the raid in the 70s, the biggest domestic FBI raid in history, I think at that point.
Do you recall it?
Yeah. I mean, it's in the book. I tell you from a child's eye point of view, they woke us up and, what it was like to experience the raid with all these FBI agents from the viewpoint of a little kid. And it was a long raid. I think it was 24 hours. So they kept us up all night and moved us around. And my perspective of that raid is going to be very different than if I was working in the Guardian's office or working at one of the organizations. We were looking at all these guys in suits and moving around, and if anything, it was a break from our mundanity, I don't want to give the whole thing away, but it's been an incredible crucible But it's also been, something. It's been an adventure that I shouldn't have survived, but it's also been an adventure. Yeah. And there were very good and amazing people that when I was on the brink that helped me. But I had a few, I had some chronic physical conditions, because you're in these dorms, no one's looking at your body. So maybe you get a physical condition, and then a year goes by, and then have to go to the emergency room. We had the head lice and the sickness that went through these dorms. I mean, there just wasn't a lot of attention to hygiene, considering how militaristic it was, right? And when there was attention to hygiene, like they had this thing called a white glove inspection, where you have to make everything so there's no strain of dirt. Los Angeles is a desert. It's built on dust. It's the dustiest city in the world, and so having little kids try to white glove a slum, I mean, we're talking about a really intense environment where I didn't even learn to brush my teeth, didn't have sheets, didn't have blankets, and then had to survive in this kind of militaristic environment. It's kind of like, if anyone's read that book Ender's Game or seen the movie Ender's Game, it's like a very extreme version of that. So I wish that I hadn't lived it, but I think it's theatrically a fascinating account of, what a human being can endure and still be alive.
Yeah. You are partly African-American descendant.
I am.
Correct?
I am.
Yes. Did that impact your upbringing inside the building?
It didn't really. I mean, when I would visit my grandmother, it was a huge part of her identity, but I didn't know who my grandparents were. My grandfather died before I was born. I didn't know anything about my family. And I think that this is a really important thing. The book it says slavery, right? I'm not saying it's not about necessarily growing up the way I did being a form of slavery. It might be. I mean, what is a slave? I think we should talk about that next.
Yes.
But but it also speaks to what my grandparents accomplished from 1865 emancipation to 1940, when right after my grandmother and grandfather got married and finished medical school, and what they accomplished what my family accomplished as black families in America is kind of an untold story of kind of staggering success, wealth. And my grandfather was a doctor. My great grandfather was the black doctor in the town where Alex Haley grew up. He was my grandmother's friend, and he was my Aunt Lucy's schoolmate. My grandfather, who I never met, was a flight surgeon in the World War II in Burma. He was what's called a Tuskegee Airman. And my uncle was a Tuskegee Airman who served under a famous black general called Benjamin O. Davis. And I had no concept of what my family had accomplished. I just felt I was just illiterate and alone. And by the time I started to think maybe, my grandmother, when I was 16, 17, she was trying to explain to me that I came from something different. I was so illiterate, Mirjam, I just couldn't face it. The idea of trying to learn to do math or learn to write, because I couldn't write even as an adult, right? Even I could read at a high level, but I couldn't write a paragraph barely at 18, 19, 20. Okay.
Yeah.
It would have been like chicken scratches that maybe I could see, trying to solve that as an adult, it was really degrading to me. And it felt like it would have been easier to go to Mars it was like every time you go to like try to write, or you try to do like some basic math, because I didn't even learn addition or subtraction, you just get this like spike into your head telling you how little you know and how broken you are. So you're just, if you try to face something like that, you're basically facing being broken. And one of the great ironies is Hubbard says this whole point of Dianetics, this counseling is to remove psychological pain and physical pain. My entire childhood was only that, psychological pain and physical pain. So why are you creating this therapy that solves those things and then reaping psychological pain and physical pain on people? It just seems nutty, right?
Yeah,
yeah. So anyway, so I'm really referring to my family in that, you know. But I'm also saying, but then this is an interesting question. It's like, what is a slave? Well, they rob you of your place in the world. I didn't have a place in the world. I didn't have a home. They rob you of your history. They put you in an environment where you're told this is who you are and what you were born for, so that you'll be compliant and obedient. So I do think there's great irony in what my grandparents, my family did after emancipation, in terms of, you know, when my grandfather graduated from medical school, he was a orphan that had inherited millions and millions of dollars in 1930s money. He used to, and he hid that because he didn't want the other medical students at the black medical school to know that he had means. That was accumulated generational wealth from agriculture in the South. Okay.
Yeah.
But, you know, so if you start to go, okay, well, what is this? Like, what did they freed themselves from? They've been robbed of their history. They've been robbed of their geography. They've been robbed of their choice, their free will. So I think it would be hard to, and again, this is not against Hubbard's Scientology. You know, it's just a word. You know, I don't like the words very much because I feel like there's complicated words to describe disgusting things. We one of the places where we lived is this place called the Apollo Training Academy. He had all, or the Cadet Org. It sounds like ROTC or like some sort of young military club, but really it's a slum office building with abusive nannies. I mean, they really put the worst of the worst to run the childcare. The people that they didn't need to do the intelligent things were put over with the kids. Okay. Yeah. I think that, yeah. So the question is, you know, so I think that there's great irony in the fact that my grandparents, what they accomplished after slavery, and that this was a 75-year, you know, you could almost say 100-year rise out of the ashes of the impossible, and just a tremendous success.
Yes.
Even in the 20s, even in the late 19th century. And then the grandson, who should have been born a prince, is born a slave.
Yes, and like maybe not in physical change, but still in change of some sort.
I would say physical change. You have to read the book. I mean, I think that if so, you asked me, Jamie, how did you grow up? I would say that I grew up in captivity in my early childhood. I feel like that was captivity. And by the time I could roam at 7 or 8 years old, I was mentally a slave. There's this incredible film called Never Let Me Go, from a book by this famous Japanese novelist. I'll screw up his name and people will get mad at me. Called Never Let Me Go, about these kids that grow up in a boarding school, and you think it's a normal boarding school, but really they're harvested for their organs when they get to be about 18 or 20 for the wealthy people. And what's so interesting about it is they have free reign. They can get in cars and drive to different hospitals and drive to different places, but they never try to escape because they've been programmed. So I believe that the first 7 years of my life, I was 100% held in captivity. I don't know any other way you could describe it. I had no parents. I had nowhere to go. I had no one to call. I had to survive, and I was just trying to survive. And I think I've been in denial for most of my life at the crucible that I went through. You know. Yeah.
Yes. Did you know the whole time, since you can recall, you know, consciousness or whatever you want to call it, that you were prepared for something greater within the organization, that you had a place there and your faith was already decided before you?
Yeah, again, that's another thing that makes a slave, is your life is predetermined before you. You know, it's like the word Child X. Why did I call it Child X? You know, I called it Child X as a kind of metaphor for being marked by an X, your life being completely determined before you even draw your first breath. And I don't just call myself a Child X. I think that kids that grew up outside of the Inner Navy were marked that way, to either join the Inner Navy or to believe certain things that would have very negative long-term effects on their lives. So I would look at, you know, Lisa Marie Presley as a Child X. I would look at Nora, who didn't grow up in there. You know, I would look at Nora that way. I would look at Aaron that way. I would look at, you know, our lives were predetermined for us by our parents before we had a chance to, even know what that we were, right. But to answer your question about did I know, yeah, I mean, at 5 years old, you know, there was they used to we had this in the lobby of the Melrose building, which was this horrible slum, or this, you know, now it's like a fireplace factory. They had a massive organizational chart, and they would force us as kids for hours on a Sunday morning to do what's called repetition school, Chinese school, to learn it. Okay. And I remember we're somewhere around that time, this guy would come over, he'd be in like a dirty Navy uniform. You know, they lined us all up. You know, I might have been 5 years old, to sign the billion-year contract. And I remember saying, there was a question at the end, and I remember saying, like, you know, when do we get to see our parents? Well, when we clear the planet, which means remove the reactionary mind of every person on Earth, right? And I said to the guy, well, when is that? You know, and it was probably January. You know, he's like, we should have the planet clear by June. 6 months, and you're going to be able to see your parents again. So he told me if we cleared the planet, I could see my parents. So I felt like it was my job to be compliant and just endure the crucible of abuse and pain, so that my mother could work, so that in 6 months we'd be together. And I remember, you know, and then, you know, and that we, you know, and then we'd be in this 6 months, we'd finish this planet. And then the idea is we'd go to other planets, and we'd go to the next planet and fix that one. Right. So for sure, I probably put a scratch on my first billion-year contract when I was 5 years old, and believed it. I also believed in Santa and the Easter Bunny, and I believed cartoons were real, like Peter Pan. I probably believed that the people that I saw on TV lived inside the box. I believed a lot of things, right? But, you know, so yeah, it was a very strange, I definitely felt that I was enlisted on this mission, and I believed in that mission and was a part of it from the time I was 5.
Yeah.
And if someone said, okay, Jamie, you're 5 years old, what's your job in this mission? Like, if I could spoke from how I felt, from like, if I could use my adult words for how I perceived my life at 5, I would say my job was to suffer. If I was willing to suffer enough, then my parents could be free to go do what they needed to do to save the planet. My body would grow, and then I would start contributing to save the planet. So my job was to endure pain, physical pain and mental pain. And that's outlined. But again, I don't want people to think it's totally a bummer story. And you could say Lord of the Flies is a bummer story. It's a tremendous quest. It's a tremendous adventure. Joseph Campbell says, the cave you fear to enter, in the cave you fear to enter lies the treasure you seek. And me looking back on that story was like, I was always afraid to look back. And so part of doing it now was, and also, you know, part of it's people like you. The fact that there's all these never ends that are now standing up for what happened to us. Like, if you guys didn't exist, I don't think I'd be doing it. Because part of the shame was, well, nobody else has a problem with what happened to us as kids. So what's the big deal? And then we're programmed from when we're young to believe it's all our fault. Mirjam doesn't care. Robert Dam doesn't care. These people don't care. Maybe they're right. Maybe we're all responsible for it. Maybe it's no big deal. But now in the last year and a half, when you guys have come out in droves and said no more, that has been massively inspirational to me.
Yeah. I feel it's everyone's responsibility, not just mine. It's also my neighbor's responsibility. It's my brother's responsibility. Where we can act, there are a lot of things we cannot impact on, but the things we can do, we should be doing them in order to ensure this will never happen again.
Yeah, the other thing that reason I wrote the book isn't really about Scientology. Like, I overcame adult illiteracy. I overcame not having parents. I overcame never having gone to school. I overcame we had a break where we moved to Oregon for a brief period of time, but I overcame an almost 19-year-old lack of education and crucible of physical torture. I feel like I was tortured. And I talk about that, you know, what I think that was in the book. We're not calling it torture, but you can decide when you read what's happening to this kid, what that is. Okay.
Yeah.
I survived that, and I ended up getting a degree from one of the best universities in England, in the world. Okay.
In the world.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that, the question is how, right? So ultimately, yeah, I mean, I think I was inspired to write this book for people that we've lost, that I cared about, that, to suicide or drug addiction, but that grew up like that didn't have for whatever reason, they couldn't endure it, right? But I also think that does that become that? I think that is a story of humanism. It's a humanist story. And I think it's a book more for anyone. I really, why I wrote it more than any other reason was it's a book for anyone that's gone to an impossible place, that thinks there's no road back. And the message for me is you can come back from anything with the right framework. But also I had opportunities. It's not completely a meritocracy. I had, people, I had angels that helped me. Right. But I tried, to show how you can be at the furthest reaches of anything. And so in that way, it's a contribution to people. When I got the opportunity to write, my first impulse was, no, I don't want to write about this. There's been 500 books written on the subject. What the heck do I have to contribute to that? But then when I started to think of what it can contribute to as a humanist story outside, I mean, it's got an incredible backdrop of this like crazy captain, when I'm living in that baby factory or baby machine as a kid, this guy's sailing around the high seas, with a religious group. And, it's the backdrop is incredibly cinematic and theatrical, as a story, but ultimately it's about survival and overcoming the impossible to me.
I feel I have heard a lot of stories, and children who grew up in Scientology, they always seem to downplay their own experiences and say that mine wasn't that bad, this wasn't that bad. And it seems like it requires external, a third party to say, yes, it was bad, this was really
I think
bad for you.
the question you should ask me is, if there's one major realization that you got from finishing that book, what is it? Ask me.
What is it? What is the one major realization you got from the book?
What I survived, the severity of what I survived. How am I alive? How am I alive?
Was this the same thing you were also thinking before, that your experience was not as bad?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I was downplaying it because I've been programmed to think that everything was my fault. We learned this really kind of powerful concept of, they don't call it karma, but it's like karma. Like if something happens and you're 4 years old and you get hit by a car, well, you pulled it in. Well, how does a innocent 4-year-old pull something in? That's the word Hubbard used. Well, you must have done something in a past life, right, to deserve it. So everything you deserve, and that turns into you being in denial about what you survived. And then you get older and everything inside you feels broken, but it wasn't that big of a deal. So that disconnect, that cognitive distance, is like you survived the impossible of all this physical abuse and mental abuse and torture, but it's all no big deal because of the programming. So you pretend like it's no big deal, right? That disconnect, I think, causes people to invert and kind of self-destruct, because those two things can't be aligned. And the result of not being able to align what you cognitively want to believe with what you feel results in self-destructive behavior, whether it's drugs, anything to take your nervous system for a swim, anything to give you relief. So the biggest thing that I got out of it was, how am I alive? Yeah.
But then something happened at one point. You joined the paramilitary organization called the Sea Organization, and you even were in Copenhagen for a short time.
Well, I mean, I joined that thing, when I was 5. So I had uniforms from the time I was 5 off and on. It was always changing, but I mean, I worked at the advanced division running folders that contain all the past lives from the archives. I did child labor. You know, they forced me to do, not for, I mean, like I thought it was an adventure at the time. When you read the book and you see the child labor that I did, I mean, it's beyond, right? Like the physical damage to my body, and even maybe to my mind. When we first moved into that building, you know, they had me cleaning up that building. Okay, and so and there was lots of toxic, and you know, I'm not talking about the potential exposure to toxic chemicals. I'm talking about, there are accounts in the book of being covered in toxic substances day after day, every day at 8 or 9 years old. Okay. And that being told, and then, but in my mind at the time, I'm not thinking I'm doing child labor. I'm thinking this is an adventure. I'm trying to frame it as, this is my job to save the planet. Right. So, you know, what was the question? It was a really good question.
My question is that when did the doubt start creeping in, and what was the final push for you to
okay,
to
well,
say that this was enough?
I was really numb. And then we went to Oregon for a couple of years where I was just like, was able to like be in the rain, get Fs, and just kind of not have that pressure on me all the time. And we went back when Hubbard died. We went back. They got my parents to come back, and I was 16, living in LA. I was living in this little slum apartment with my parents for a short period. That wasn't going to work out. I found a well-to-do Scientology family that was willing to let me live in their guest room if I worked for them. So I moved out at 16. Was on my own. Was working for this movement school. In exchange, they were letting me go to school there, but it was the fake school. I wasn't really learning anything. Okay. I got a high school diploma from them, being illiterate. Okay. And then at 17, you know, I can't write. I mean, that's real. When I was like working in the movement, I worked in the fundraising department, and I would have invoices at the end of the week. You know, this young Mexican kid that didn't speak English would have to rewrite my invoices because he couldn't read them. When I say I couldn't write, I'm not just saying, well, you know, he was a bad writer. No, I didn't understand periods, paragraphs, commas, semicolons. I could read it, but no ability to understand how to use it. Okay, it was confusing to me. Why do you end the paragraph there? Is it what's the rule that I don't know? It was like I felt like I was a slave inside. Felt like I was a prisoner inside my own body. That I had this really, really big mind, but there was nothing in it. So I felt imprisoned by my illiteracy. So at 17, I was looking at a life of manual labor, and one of my buddies was like, "Hey, man, maybe we should just, you know, what else are we going to do?" You know, he had some of the same fate, even though he hadn't grown up in the inner Navy. And we should just go into this thing. He convinced me. And so we could have meaning. And, you know, the answer is I could get into a lot of physical, specific things that happened. You know, I was there. I went to the ship. I went to Canada. I went to Denmark. I went to England. And then I ended up back in Florida. It's a few years. But, you know, if you were to ask me why I finally escaped, I mean, there were some incidents where I felt like I was being scapegoated for things and stuff like that, which I talk about in detail in the book. But ultimately, Mirjam, I mean, and this is real, and this is not why this is on the book, but it's ultimately, if you were to ask me why I had the courage to execute an escape, and it really was that, which is outlined in the book. You know, I'm walking around at 19 years old wearing a fucking naval uniform in Central Florida. I mean, I was never going to tell the world that. No. Why would I tell the world? That's pretty embarrassing. Okay. It's becoming middle-aged and seeing what my friend's 19-year-old kid is like, going, oh my God, I was a child. Yeah. Right. But at the time, if you were just to say the reason I did it I mean, I could have come up with something that happened that was the catalyst, but ultimately I started having thoughts that I was a slave, that I am a worker bee in a giant honeycomb of where there's no individual thought or expression. I felt the feeling of that a slave must feel: no future, no self, to use a Hubbard word, no self-determination. I felt like a slave, and nothing was more bearable to me than I couldn't bear feeling like a slave. That might have been my ancestors telling me, fuck this. And I ponder that in the book. And you know what's crazy is this artist friend of mine that was the one that convinced me to go in. Beautiful, beautiful man, beautiful friend. I mean, in a lot of ways, he saved my life, that kid, because I had grown up in poverty and illiterate in this inner Navy, and he kind of brought me into the upper middle class kids and brought me into that world. He's still there.
Wow.
And he would have done incredible things in life. You know, so I think there can be a version of this thing maybe that's not abusive. You know, like any or like, you know, as abusive as any other religion. I believe in religion. I believe in their freedom to do what they want to do, but you can't abuse people, and you need to be more responsible with children.
Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah.
So no specific incident. It was
no
the reality was creeping in.
No, I mean, I was doing some fundraising, and I don't want to give it away, but like basically I worked with this other person, and when she did something wrong, because they were punishing me.
Yeah.
And I basically decided, if I continue to be punished for somebody else's actions, that's it. But it was very spur of the moment. I mean, I was lucky. Because I worked in the fundraising department, I was able to make money selling books. And so I was able to like squirrel some cash away. But you know, it would be way harder to escape now, because the place that I escaped from, the Hacienda Gardens, you know, now it's gated and there's security there. But back then it was open. So, but it was, you know, harrowing. You know, I had to like change cabs and get out of there without people suspecting, and not really know where I was going. And that was terrifying. But you know, I really hope that and then one thing I will say that's really, I think, important is God, how do I want to say this? I really tried to, when I started this thing and I agreed to do this, I thought, okay, I'll probably include about 20% of what happened, but the real embarrassing stuff, I'm not going to talk about that. It's too much shame. It's too much like physical, humiliation. But you know, you get writing, and I have a really beautiful friend of mine that helped me, that was there for me every step of the way, and as a thought partner, and all that stuff that I said, you know, that 75% of the stuff that I said, no way I'm talking about that. You forget that that this thing is going to see the world when you're in this like 7-day-a-week, grind, and you just want to get it all out. So everything is in there. All of these astonishing things that happen to this kid is one after the other. And then also, like, I'm dealing with the gang-ridden streets of Los Angeles. I'm dealing with junkies. You know, the first in the Astro Day House, when we would go play in downtown LA at 3 years old, we would play at MacArthur Park. We're stepping over needles, you know, and then just the poverty of inner city Los Angeles, and the things that roaming around inner city Los Angeles as a child of poverty had its own travails, you know. But
so is it shame? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, ultimately it's shame. It's shame. And so, I mean, you know, I've sent the book out to a couple people. You know, again, I don't know too many people that were born in the Los Angeles slums from the baby factory that are around anymore. I know there's people that were born in England, you know, I mean, I'm sure their conditions weren't great either. I think mine were particularly heinous, not having parents and the types of abuse. But I also think it was, you know, the 70s and 80s where people didn't wear seatbelts, and, you know, it was paddled in school. You know, we can't always look at the way our standards today through that lens. And I also think that in my work with trauma victims, I've interviewed you know, we tend to be very narcissistic about our trauma when we survive something like this particular group. And I've interviewed Rwandan genocide survivors and soldiers and first responders. And so, you know, but I do think my particular situation, if you saw it in a movie, you'd go, no way.
Yeah.
You know, it's stranger than fiction. Yes. And, but it's also a beautiful story of a quest to survive in an incredible backdrop. I mean, now that I'm through it, you know what I mean? Yeah, I wrote it with artistry. I think it reads like a novel that if you read it as a novel, if it wasn't true, you'd go, oh, this is, you know, come on, this is too much. Right.
Truth normally is.
And I have a question for you as somebody that's been observing this thing, because I so appreciate your thoughts and your voice and you know, having Robert Dam on. Why do you think it is, Mirjam, that us kid survivors of this thing, now adults, why are we so self-absorbed with our own trauma? Or are we? I feel like kids that grew up in the Inner Navy, or kids that grew up outside the Inner Navy that went through these manipulations, okay, we really kind of believe that what we went through, what our trauma is worse than everyone else's trauma. We're really caught up in our own story of abuse. Do you think that's true? Or do you think that we're like any abuse survivor?
No, definitely not like any abuse survivor, I would say.
What makes us different?
I don't know if it's the shame or if it's something else. I feel that there's something that is not let go. Maybe you felt some certain kind of release when you wrote the book, for example. What I wanted to say to you before, JB, you're probably a little bit older than me, but I need to tell you that shame is not for you to bear. That is not for you to bear.
I'm starting to realize. I'm starting to realize that months after being complete, but I'm just starting to realize it. I'm just starting to realize that, and you know, I decided to seek support and get therapy during the whole writing process, and that's something that comes up where my social worker says to me, dude, like, you didn't do anything. And I remember when I was starting to write this thing and I was talking to different writers, it was a writer that I wanted to maybe get some advice from and help me. And I was really embarrassed to tell her the story. And she said, what are you embarrassed about? You didn't do anything. You were a baby. So I think this really is the crux of the whole thing. And I examine this deeply. And I think I put the answers there as best I can in Child X. Is what is it that we go through that makes it so that we can't shake this thing? Right. And that we see it in such a shameful way that's different than maybe being abused in the Catholic Church, or being abused as a Jehovah's Witness, or being abused as a Mormon, or other groups. I'm not saying these groups are all abusive. I'm just saying in any religious abuse, and there's not always religious abuse. What is it that's different? Because, you know, you have these kids, like you have somebody like Elizabeth Gale's brother who goes to MIT at 16. He comes from a wealthy family. And I think it was on Hubbard's birthday. I could be wrong. He jumps out a window.
Yes, it is.
Right. This is not Hubbard's birthday. Yeah. And he was never in the Inner Navy. Right. And then, you know, I was friends. What is it about this experience that even if you don't grow up in the Inner Navy, you can't, depending on what geography and where you can't survive? You know, and I think that I greatly examine that in Child X, and I think you will leave the book with an understanding of what these kids went through existentially, even if they weren't in the Inner Navy. The constructs that was being inculcated into these children, was for many of them, even if they weren't in the Inner Navy, a death sentence. Even if they're alive, a lot of them are just warehousing themselves. So what was the psychic indoctrination, the psychic inculcation that created these kind of Manchurian candidates of rage, of which I count myself as a member. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I understand the rage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it's too hard to look into yourself, try and actually look into your true self rather than go back to the form of Scientology, how Scientology raises you.
For the first time in my life, I'm seeing it as not my shame. And but even then, because of the indoctrination, I feel guilty. I feel guilty that the people that I grew up with, that I love, the people that are still in there, will see me sharing my story and trying to understand myself and trying to speak for these kids that were hurt as an attack on them. I feel horrible about that. That's not what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
I don't want people that I grew up with, that I love, to think that I'm against them. It's not about that. It's about it's about what was done, the abuses and the harm, the destructive, the physical and psychological destructive forces that were reaped upon children. I don't feel like that's been told in an existential way to really understand what that is. Even if you weren't in the Indian or Navy, that's what I've tried to do. And that's what drove me, because it was very hard to do. But I kept thinking, okay, this is this is the book that should have been written 50 years ago.
Yeah. But it has been said that recovery from high control groups, especially Scientology, I think it was Rick Ross that said that it takes the longest time to recover.
I don't know that you can recover.
Scientology.
I don't know that you can recover from Scientology. I meet people that were 40 years out and they're still using the words and they're still using the constructs. Like, I'll talk to someone that's outside of the group. They've spoken out. They're in their, they're in their 60s, and they'll say things like, make up the damage. I need to make up the damage to my kids. That's a Hubbard construct, and they're using those constructs, right? And I'll also say, and I explained this in the book, and I think it's really fascinating, I used a lot of his constructs to get out of it, right? There's a concept in there of intention is cause, that if you visualize hard enough and strong enough and repetitively enough, you can cause the physical world to bend to your will. I was indoctrinated with that from the time I was 3 or 4 or 5, and I believed it. And I believe that when I was illiterate at 20 years old, I used that as a weapon to deal with illiteracy. I can will myself through this. And I think that teaching actually helped me get out of it. It's not all bad. It's not right. It's complicated.
But I was told that, if you really want something and you work really hard, you can make it happen.
Yeah, I don't think that you can fully recover from this thing. I really don't. And I think that the minute you think you're fully recovered from it, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's like any other group. I mean, again, like, even when I was interviewing Rwandan genocide survivors, they're not carrying the shame. They can barely survive, right? But because of all the people they lost in their family or around them and the way it happened, but they're not carrying the shame, right? There's something about this thing of you are responsible for your condition at 3 years old. Everything bad that happens to you, in or out, while you're being psychologically hit with a psychological ice pick every day.
Yeah.
That I just don't think you can recover from it. And anybody that says they've recovered from it, I would be nervous. Would make me nervous. I'm constantly looking for what am I missing? What am I not seeing? And I probably won't totally understand the story for a few years when it's been reflected back at me through the readers, when it's all over the world, and people from other groups and other ways. There's that phrase in Eastern philosophy, the eye cannot see itself but in reflection. But I will say, for the first time in my life, after finishing this thing, I'm starting to go, this is not my problem. But even when I say that to you out loud, every time someone attacked that group from the time I was a baby, they were an enemy. They were an attacker. There's no such thing as a critic when you're on the inside. Everyone is an attacker, right? There's no such thing as somebody that wants to stop child abuse. They're an attacker. And if you were to say to a Scientologist who has a good and pure heart, because they're inculcated with these ideas, you would say, well, what about a child that hasn't done anything in the world? You're responsible for your own condition. And I think that the cross currents of some of these ideas, total willpower, and then everything's your fault. And then, you grow up with these concepts like, family is not important, because if you've lived billions of lives, your mother's been your mother's before, your father's been your father, you've been your father's mother, you've been married to your mother, you've been your, so. And I remember going to church one time with a Christian kid when I was volunteering at 13, and thinking that it was so weird, and all this talk of the afterlife, and thinking, God, we have to live for now. Like, it's incredible, horrible to think that we could not live a good life now and be consumed with the afterlife. We should be focused on living a good life now. Meanwhile, that's all I'm doing. Yeah, is living for the afterlife, totally unaware of it. I remember going to see this movie, In the Name of the Father, about these Irish people that were falsely imprisoned for IRA bombings that got out. This incredibly inspiring film, really powerful, really hit me in the chest. Incredible film with Daniel Day-Lewis, directed by Jim Sheridan. And I remember walking out of that film thinking, thank God nothing bad like that ever happened to me. Meanwhile, what I'd been through, Mirjam, was far worse, I would say, than what these guys had been through.
Yes.
Right. And so, just from, the militaristic public, what was the data beatings to the they were sanctioned and they were ordered when we were in the Red Brick Building, which was the worst of it, to just the brotherhood of like these kids that can stand by me. You're going through this with these other kids, and these bonds you're developing with these other kids is like people that have survived a war together. Right. So there's also really, really beautiful things about how you survive being dispossessed. How you like it's almost like Gladiator. How do you survive when you're a slave trying to survive with all these other slaves? What does that do to your relationships? What is the daily adventure of that? So I do also think that there were moments of joy, moments of beauty, moments of deep connection and adventure. So I ultimately it's an adventure story too, right?
So what are like the, let's say, couple of things you want people to take out from this book after they read it? What are the?
I want people to understand that this should have been the first book ever written, and I want people to understand what these children went through, inner Navy or not, time zone or not, and I want them to understand the beauty of it and the horror of it, so that they can take this incredible adventure of what these kids survived and maybe apply some things to their own life that would make them move through the world better. That would be probably, no matter what religion you are, that's probably ultimately, I want the story of the kids that I grew up with that are no longer with us. I mean, one of the things I did an interview, and I had a really close friend back then from when I was a kid named Mark Peters. And, because I did this interview a year and a half ago, people reached out to me. And that one was one of the old guys from then was this. And, I had to find out that he died of a drug overdose a few years ago. I didn't know he was dead, because I came out. Also, there was this incredible scene in the 80s where all these kids were kicked out. If they were 14 or 15. If you were above 14 or 15 and you didn't sign the bill in your contract, they kicked you out. So dozens and dozens of these kids were living on the street right around Big Blue. And some of them got involved with crime and were stealing motorcycles, and there was a drug scene, and they were all right across from Big Blue. It was like a Godard film. You had all these ex-movement kids on motorcycles, hanging out, doing nothing because they'd been kicked out. They were uneducated. And this incredible scene in Soup of how we were like interacting with cholos and going to concerts. And some of us were, you know, some of us were drug addicts and some of us were stealing cars, and just this incredible like film of an ex-kid in the 1980s, this incredible Soup in Los Angeles. That whole, I hated it. But when I was writing it, I was like, my God, this was fucking bananas, crazy, and really, really interesting. And I think people will be able to see things in themselves. You know, like, I think it's important to be gratitude driven and to try to see the beauty in even the worst experiences. So I think there's just so much of just watching this kid from birth, you know, in this slum in downtown LA, and just as he goes through this crucible for the next 20 years of just constant and what is existing in there that allows him to survive. You know, I think it's but if there's one takeaway that I'm starting to give, is the shame is not mine.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that the same message you would like your peers, once grown up in Scientology, also to take away from?
I think that they're better at it than me. You know, when I watch my peers on YouTube and stuff, I mean, Robert said in his book, I said, what was the takeaway? What was the common denominator? Robert Tam, who wrote the Hotels of Darkness book, which is still in Danish. It's not been translated to English. He said shame. And I was like, wow. I mean, these kids from Europe of a different generation, same feeling. Right.
Yes.
But I also see that, like, a lot of the kids that grew up like me are, you know, they're on YouTube and they're raging, you know, but maybe that's a form of shame. I mean, do you feel like these guys that are on YouTube that are telling their stories, like, do you see shame in them or do you see defiance in them?
I think defiance due to shame.
Okay.
That would be my analysis.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I do think probably where I will end up landing, and where people will get out of this book that I don't see, that I wasn't intending. It happens to me all the time. I have a graphic novel coming out. It's loosely based on my life, but it's, you know, in a future.
But it's such a privilege to be able to do what your heart desires.
Yeah, I have some really cool. Really, this is the year of me as a fine artist. My fine art will be distributed in bookstores all over the United States, at least. For the first time, like, really my work as an artist, people will be seeing this year. And I had to fight for that, and it is a privilege. But I do feel like maybe, and it happens all the time, that I'll write an art piece and I just sit down and I write it and then I make it. And there's all of these symbols and all of these things that you get out of it that I wasn't thinking about when I made it. And one thing I wasn't thinking about with Child X is how one can see that if they experienced abuse as children, that shame is not theirs. I don't think I thought about it, but I think anybody that read this would see a way to maybe let go. And that maybe is the overall message of the book, where I didn't intend it. But I think that it's what's happening to me now. And I do think that other people will pick it up and go, you know, my neglect, my abuse, my defilement, I don't have to carry that. The person that perpetrated that carries that. And so that is, that is it. So I do believe that whatever these guys experience, I've never seen another group, and maybe I'm wrong, that carries again, there's people that carry shame. So the consistency of the shame, no matter the time or the geography, is incredible. Like, I have friends that grew up Jehovah's Witness, and they don't necessarily carry shame, or grew up Mormon that necessarily carry shame. Or with us, it's like one for one across the board. So I'm curious, do you think you understand why it's different with us, and is it different with us? Why is our shame worse? Why do we carry it worse from an outside observer's perspective?
I think it's the multiple factors, the so-called Hubbard technology, which attacks you from all sides.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with another high control group that is controlling you 360.
Okay. So I do explain in the book, listen, there's lots of good techniques, and I talk about things in the book that helped me. But there's a few techniques, a couple techniques that I think are, they're like MK Ultra. Their mind. I don't like the word brainwashing, but they're definitely psychologically subverting or manipulating. And I do an existential breakdown where I explain how these things work and why these things work. And I think that even if you didn't have that manipulation, that you might identify with it and help you. And I'm in this position now where I want the pre-sales of this thing to be high, because they'll print more copies, and then we have a better chance of having more copies in the world, which means more lists. Lists just mean more eyeballs. So people want to support me and support this cause. Pre-ordering the book is a massive way to tell the publisher and the bookstores that people care about what happened to these lost generations and children of Scientology. If you pre-order the book, that's what you're saying.
Yes.
And
my moderators have been sharing the pre-order link every 10 minutes in the chat. I can see there's a lot of
so I'm shamelessly doing that. I'm shamelessly,
of course,
pre-ordering it. People could say, well, he's trying to promote his own thing. Like, obviously by doing this, I take a lot of risk and I bring a lot of harm. I remember somebody saying to me one time, like, you have to be immune to fair game. Like, I'm not looking, I don't want to deal with these, like, I will, if they want to attack a guy that they tried to destroy, that, whose family escaped slavery and that went through and it's documented and corroboratable that I experienced all this stuff. If they want to come challenge that and try to accuse me of things, fine, do it. Yes. Am I looking forward to dealing with these guys? Part of the reason you never do it is they put the fear of God in you, that if you ever speak out against them, they will destroy you. Okay. So if you want to say that this is important, then I believe that a lot of the kids that I grew up with, that there's a depth here of potential understanding that could create some healing. That's my hope. Maybe they'll, maybe I didn't do that, but that's what I was trying to do. And if you can pre-order, it sends a message to the booksellers and all these people. This story matters. And when I say, and I guess maybe are we kind of wrapping soon, Mirjam?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Then one way I would end it is this: like, when I say that this should have been the first book, like, it's incredible to me. Alex Gibney's doing another documentary on Danny Masterson, and then there was Going Clear, and then Leah's show was incredible. One of the things that was so incredible about her show is that it's told the story of what happened to so many of the kids in or out of the Inner Navy. But when I say, and when Scandal of Scientology was written in the early 70s by Paulette Cooper, that the early book should have been, where are these children and what is happening to them? People knew. And one of the things I examine in the book is, how come no one has cared about what's happened to these children from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s? Why is it that there's just like this weird opaque wall where all children matter and they're at the first and always at the forefront of our mind as the most vulnerable, but not in this case? I explain why I think that is. I break it down, and I think that's useful no matter what group you're involved with or what you've lived through. So when I say that this should have been the first book, I'm not kidding. Okay. This should have been written in, or some version of this in 1975. And it's not, and it's crazy that we're 50 years in before this is truly being examined in a really deep way. The way that I'm trying to examining it, hopefully I did a decent job. The way that Robert Dam is examining it, the way Catherine Spallino is examining it, the way that Nathan Rich is examining what happened to him. This is all in the last 10 years, right? Yes. And really just focusing on all of the kids. That's even the last 2 years, like, you know, Robert, Hotels of Darkness, what I'm trying to do, like, this is 50 years later, and it's why, and I think I know why, and I think I explain it in the book.
Yes, and I will do my very best to promote your book, not just now, but also going forward. And I would like to talk with you once the book has been released. Do you have the release date, official release date for it?
Yeah.
And will it be the same globally?
It'll come out at the end of July. It may or may not come out in all the, I mean, you can get it anywhere in the world, but it will, you know, it probably won't start to be published in different languages till later in the year. But at the end of July, it comes out, you know, and yeah, I mean, and it's a really weird feeling because, you know, normally when I finish a book, like I have this graphic novel that's coming out, I have this incredible sense of triumph, this incredible sense of accomplishment when the books show up and they're in the bookstores, right? Like it's this really crazy, cool feeling, right? This isn't like that. This is, I have moments where I wake up and I'm proud of myself, and I have moments where I wake up and I go, you told yourself and you promised yourself you were never going to share that. Maybe you shouldn't have. I have no triumph in this being in the world. On some, I do, at some level as an artist, I feel like maybe artistically it's my best work. So I feel like it's something as an artist, but as a human being, I have nights all the time where I'm like, where I said, maybe your desire to not share this was the right decision. Why did you decide to do this? I'm not necessarily looking forward to it coming out. I'm not, you know, I'm a private person, and everything is exposed. I mean, even I showed it to a relative of mine who grew up in the Inner Navy with me, and he called me and he said, you know, Jamie, I don't know you to ever be this open. I don't know this person. And, you know, he never knew what happened to me. I have close friends in the film that are really successful in the film and television industry that I never talked to about it before, that got early screeners, and they're calling me going, how does this become you? And I say, keep reading, right? So, you know, it's a very strange feeling to be wanting it to see the world because of what you want for the, you know, what your mission is, I guess, and then absolute disgust and terror that people are going to see you in such a vulnerable and exposed way. You know, I don't know. It's like almost like, you know, being a war correspondent or something, and, you know, you win the Pulitzer Prize because you covered like the, you know, a genocide by the Khmer Rouge, and your friends died. Okay, you won the Pulitzer Prize, but you're living with that experience. So ultimately, I cannot believe that I'm so open, and I'm glad I did it, but I'm also afraid of how open I've been in terms of what I went through and experienced. It's just not like me to share that with people.
But now it's time to end the shame. So
yes, yeah. I mean, I mean, there's a great scene in Ender's Game where this guy Achilles, Bean and Ender see him in a vulnerable position. He's like an evil child genius, and then he's hell bent on wanting to kill them because he doesn't want anyone to exist in the world that's seen him that exposed. You know, I also think it's just exposure. But, you know, at the end of the day, if you want to connect, you have to be vulnerable. And you know, again, this relative, you know, this friend of mine called me and said, how are you being this open? This is not the person I've known for, you know, 40 years. And I just said, like, listen, that's what this is. And either you do it and you do it all the way, or you don't do it. So when I decided to do it, I did it.
Yeah. Okay. One last question. Let's imagine this book will be.
And is this live, or we're live?
We are live. We are live.
So do you want to take any questions or no?
Yeah, we can take questions just after this question.
Okay. You got it. Okay.
So let's just live in while the world where everything is gonna go perfect, you're gonna be on top of the bestseller list, and there will be a movie made of your book. Who would you like to portray you in that movie?
somebody with great gravitas, like, Morgan Freeman, Denzel.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. I have no idea, I have no idea. I don't think about it like that. I don't, again, I have a lot of conflicted feelings about it. I'm really proud of myself, but I'm also, when I say I have nights where I wake up at terror, and I'm not waking up at terror about having done the book. I'm waking up at terror about, well, maybe you shouldn't have shared that. Maybe you shouldn't have shared that. Maybe you shouldn't have shared that. You could have shared half of this, and it would still be, it would have still been as good. So I don't know.
But that's a human emotion. I have that every day as well.
Okay.
So.
Okay, good. So yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I don't. I'm terrified of a movie of this, and I probably wouldn't option it very easily. In the sense that I would have to feel like if I did at some point option it, that it would have to, that whoever did it would actually care to communicate about it the right way. So it's not something that I'm overly enthusiastically thinking about, because I would be I'd be terrified of how would somebody interpret this, right?
Okay, I thought I would like tickle your vanity a little bit.
No, but it's good, it's good, like I ask myself, I do expect a couple of the properties that I have coming out this year to be optioned. I don't know. I mean, it's vanity. Like, again, like I have a friend who's really successful in, he lives in another country, but it's a massive country, and he's got the most successful show in the history of that country right now as a producer. And I've known him for 30 years, and he called me, and he's just like, "What are you gonna do? We've known each other for 30 years. Like, what the fuck? like this happened to you?" And he's called me, disturbed, like not understanding. And I have another friend, so again, hopefully hopefully I served the kids I grew up with well. I don't want to take for granted that I did that, but that was a huge part of the goal. And God, I don't know. There's probably some young mixed kid out there that deserves a break, that should, that could do it.
Okay, I need to bring up this one because someone was suggesting Michael B. Jordan over here. So
yeah, he's getting older. I mean, I think that's really is the first act of this book, is this kid as a child. I mean, when you see what this kid deals with, from dealing with drug addiction and gangs and the poverty of Los Angeles, and back when I was a kid in Silver Lake, in Silver Lake there were no cruising signs because of like the Mexican gangs. Like, this is a different time, that stuff. I think, yeah, Michael B. Jordan. All right, I'll take it. I'll take it. He's a very powerful.
Yes,
definitely. Okay. Morgan Freeman for sure, or Denzel.
Yes,
just agree it's Denzel.
Absolutely. Yeah, okay. Great, Denzel. I love him. Okay, Lupita is saying, Jamie saw your interview on Esoterica Atlanta and pre-ordered your book on Audible. So
thank you so much, Lupita. I appreciate it. Bryce is amazing, and I really, really thank you for that.
Yeah. Lupita has been a member for 1 month. Thank you very much. And we have our friend Nora here saying, Jamie is a truth teller. The truth about what happened to those born during the 70s and 80s is horrific, and I'm so proud of Jamie for putting it down. It's not an easy truth, but it will help.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm really trying to constantly focus on is not just me, but what's happening to all the people next to me. What are they going through? Where do they end up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but that's something we have also discussed before. You can see across the borders the similarity in the stories.
Yeah, and ultimately, I've said this before. Where is this never-end community coming from that loves watching what happened to people that have gotten out of Hubbard's doctrine? And again, not all of it's bad, but I think that people like to look at trauma and healing through a prism. They like to look. They want to see things. When you see something as incredible as what some of us survived, it can help you look at your own trauma a certain way. And I think that ultimately that's what I'm trying, hopefully that's, what I'm trying to do is maybe help me and some of the kids I grew up with, like Nora, understand what happened to us. I tried, some of them may not think I did that. And then also people that didn't go through this, but have been through things where there's enough similarity that they would see something that they recognize and experience relief from that. Yeah.
Yes. Susan P. gifted Scientology Up North memberships. Thank you very much. Very much
Thank you, Susan.
appreciated.
Yeah, I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Tilty Bird is quoting Star Trek. If you want to know who you are, it's important to know who you've been.
Yeah, and I think Tilty Bird, that this is such a huge point that you're making here. Okay, that you can't really, unless you understand what you've survived in your story, you can't really see yourself in life. And maybe by being so vulnerable and sharing more than I ever wanted to share in terms of, the pain and the abuse, maybe that will encourage other people to look at the story they don't want to look at. So I do think it's so important what you're saying. If you want to determine your future, I don't believe that you can totally do that very well without understanding your past. That's probably what I've learned personally the most from getting through this. But I didn't write this for me. I wrote this for the kids I grew up with and for the people that have been through what I've been through, and to have it be documented. But I do think I'm getting something out of it. I do think that maybe I'm starting to really see what I survived. And one of my friends who's a very successful publisher called me, and I've known him for maybe 10 to 15 years. And he grew up, well, he just said, how, and so I'm starting to see it. And I feel like that's going to have a huge effect on the rest of my life. So I think that's really profound, Tilty Bird.
Yeah. Kathy's saying, my heart hurts for the children you all were, but so proud of the people you have become.
Thank you. And again, I really want to reiterate this thing about Tilty Bird. It's like on my mind. If you're listening to this and you haven't really, really examined your story, and you can feel that. You will have more determination over your life and your future and your internal life and your emotion if you truly examine what happened to you. I mean, if you look at EMDR therapy, it's you going through and looking at what happened to you. This is every way that one could do that, I think, is important. But telling that story, writing that story, even if you never share it to anyone, I think I'm starting to see will alter your life.
Yeah.
I've seen myself a lot of my life as weak.
Yeah.
Right? I've seen myself a lot of my life, Mary. Oh, I want to see that last one. Can we put it up?
Yeah, I was going to put it up, but okay. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Okay, I'll say this. I think this is a good one to have under. I've seen myself most of my life as weak because I've been running from what was done to me. Okay. Yeah. And now, having finished this thing, because I've actually looked at it, it's a complete 180. I'm looking back and going, that kid was really strong.
Yeah.
He's strong. I'm strong. I'm really strong.
Yes.
That's a pretty big paradigm shift for how one sees one's life and oneself. I don't think I never saw myself as strong. People would say that about me. I never saw it myself until finishing this thing. So when I say, go write that story, even if you just do it for you, I'm not just saying it. You will see things in yourself that you do not see now.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the pronunciation. Is it Kazuo Ishiguro?
Kazuo Ishiguro. And I will say that if you ever really want to understand what happened to us, like what we experienced psychically, and you don't want to read that book, watch the movie. There's an incredible movie that was made about this book with Andrew Garfield and Carey Mulligan. Okay. And if you want to understand psychically what it was like to grow up in the way we did, watch Never Let Me Go. It's an incredible movie. I think it's 10, 15 years old. Okay. And you will understand how we thought, how we, you will get a peek inside under the tent of what this was, because I always felt before I saw that movie that they'd taken a part of me, that they took chunks out of my body and myself that I'll never get back. And that movie is literally about kids that are being raised in this orphanage so that people can take chunks of their physical body away. And it's almost scary for me to watch because it's so accurate in terms of the feelings that so yeah, highly recommend it.
Yes, I'll have to put it on my list. Tiltybird is also saying, and I'm bringing up this for a specific reason, the abuse of a child is business of everyone who knows about it. And I wanted to add on this, that apparently all SEA organization members are mandated reporters, and that's something that has been recently discovered.
Listen, let me
and
just,
that brings a lot of, responsibility to the organization if you are deciding to neglect or look away from the abuse.
Yeah, let me say this to Tiltybird. Again, really profound. I think we're friends on Instagram, Tiltybird. I think so. If not, send me a message. But I think I've talked to you before. But send me a message.
They're a great artist.
Yes, send me a message. I want to look at your work. Again, here's why I feel like this book should have been written 50 years ago. Is I feel like if this book had been written 50 years ago, a lot of the abuse that's occurred in the last 50 years wouldn't have occurred. I think if you can make, this is kind of a Hubbard way of talking, make real what something is. I don't know that society would have allowed it to go on as long as possible. I don't know that they would have allowed it to go on as possible. I think they're somewhat aware of it. I think they're somewhat aware that these kids weren't treated well. And I don't think they're completely oblivious to that. But I also think that they have a code that is, the greatest good for the greatest number. And if you want to make a, save the world eggs Benedict, you're going to have to crack some baby skulls to do that. Right. Yeah. But the reason this should have been written 50 years ago is because if people had seen what was happening to the most vulnerable part of our population, I think they would have made changes internally if from pressure. And I also think it would have been reduced greatly. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's so sad that it wasn't done 50 years ago.
Yeah. Yes.
I think there would have been a lot less abuse.
Yeah, I agree. Kate also says they have pre-ordered and it's coming to their house in Holland 8th of August when they've been 18 years sober on the same date. So
thank you. I really appreciate that, Kate. I've talked to you before.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Haggisbasher
is suggesting that maybe some of these books should be to order to ORG, Jamie Raskin and the FBI.
I would love it if somebody would buy a bunch of them and ship it to them. Again, it's interesting. There's been all these books that are exposés about what happened, and those are really necessary, and those have changed everything. So but understanding emotionally and psychically what's going on and doing it with art, I think it opens people up in a way that just the events don't. So Haggisbasher, I would love someone to order 50, 100 copies and ship it to these organizations around the world. I think it would be amazing.
Yeah, we need to find a sponsor for it.
Yeah, somebody, if you're watching this and you're well-to-do, that would be a great thing to do.
Yeah. Then there's a comment, so many levels. I really hope the ex-Scientology community can come together to support Jamie and promote his book in the coming months. This is about bringing awareness to and seeking justice for all children raised in Scientology.
Yeah, I don't have any expectations of everyone. I appreciate what people do, and everyone has to tell their own story in their own way, and I hope they do. But I'm also, I'm focused on, the media that hasn't experienced this and doesn't do the story. I want to bring this story to people that have never been interested in this subject and don't know anything about it, and get them to see it for the first time with fresh eyes. So I hope both. But thank you so many levels. I really appreciate the sentiment.
Yes.
And if anything, part of justice, Mirjam, and why what that guy just said is so important is part of the justice is just having it be seen and acknowledged that what happened was a big deal and was important. I feel like one of the reasons we're so frustrated is that so many of us yell and scream, and it's like, yeah, it's great. Yeah, we know some bad stuff happened to you. Like, yeah, bad stuff happens to every, like it's kind of, there's something, and I think I know why that is, and I do my best to explain why this has been shoved under the table for so long, because it's one of the reasons I decided to do it. Is why is it that people can't get the depth of what this is, and that's making that it's helping it, making it very difficult for us to heal, I think.
Yeah, and you are being heard, at least here.
Thank you.
So yeah, Jamie Mustard, please keep telling your narrative, Lupita is saying. So please keep on going, despite of the occasional feel of shame or whatever. Keep going.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you, Mirjam, for the work you do, for having me, for being, a lot of you never ends have taking up the cause and saying this is important is what got me over to start to believe that it was important. Like the fact that all these never end people now believe that it's not important has been a huge driver for me. So thank you to you and the people that you work with.
Thank you. Haggis Basher, thank you so much. Thank you for having this conversation, Jamie. Thank you for opening up. I wasn't really sure what to expect today.
I hope that it was a little, a little different, and that we covered some things that we haven't talked about in the past. What I can't communicate enough that's in the book is just a crucible of physiological and psychological damage, and surviving that pressure, and how one can survive that pressure, and I hope we covered things that we haven't covered before. We've had a new conversation today, Mary.
Yeah, I think we absolutely did. Kelly YouTube fan is saying, thank you, Jamie, for being brave and sharing your story. Hashtag #FSciento. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the story with this hashtag.
No, I don't know the story.
So
I know I could imagine what it means, but I don't know the story. Yeah.
So there was a new Ideal Org opening in Austin, Texas last year, and they had covered the sign. Unfortunately, it got ripped. The plastic got ripped, and the only thing that was visible was Scientology.
Oh God.
So
okay.
It's very, very suitable.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. Where was that?
That was in Austin, Texas.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah,
that's hilarious.
So there's even T-shirts made of it, because it was a lucky coincidence that the wind was blowing the right way. Lupita, thank you so much for the super chat. Let me see if there's some other. Skyfire is also saying you deserve to be heard.
Thank you. Yeah. And anybody that's listening that has a podcast or would like to have a conversation and cover different aspects of it, reach out to me on Instagram.
Great. And Anna Banana is here also and saying, Jamie, you should be proud of yourself. Only you can tell your story. Your story is unique, as important as anyone else's.
It's funny. There's another kid. I kind of look at us kids as the children of the Apollo, because we were little kids when Hubbard was still on the boat. And there's another guy from England that I'm friends with whose parents were, mother was kicked off of the Apollo because he was 8 months pregnant. And there's something about this early generation. He's really successful in life now, but he carries that shame in that deep way that I feel like is a little grungier, a little grimier from that period. It's just a different period, and when I spend time with him, I feel like this kind of harmonic of similar energy, and yeah.
So I think that's it. We have went already over the scheduled time. Thank you so much for coming today, and thank you all the moderators and everyone who has been pre-ordering.
And it's not a completely bummer story. There's incredible adventures when I'm stationed in England and Florida and Copenhagen. I don't know how much I cover Copenhagen, but it's just a crazy story, and just how many different locations and geographies and things that happen. It's a crazy story.
Yeah, I mean, it would be impossible to cover that in an hour or two.
Yeah.
So thanks for everyone joining, and you can find the link for the pre-ordering the book also in the description. So if you decide to do it a little bit later, it's there, and also very easily to be found on Google. It's on Amazon and on the publisher's page as well.
Okay.
And I hope that you will have great success with
the fact that I'm here and being open about the fact that I was ever involved in that. When I have childhood friends that are reading this thing right now, they're, you know, in the film entertainment industry, that I never told them that I was involved with, you know, Scientology, let alone that would happen to me as a kid. So just the fact that I'm here being open with you, not just about, you know, Scientology, but also what happened to me as a kid, but just that, you know, I was involved with Scientology it's an out-of-body experience, because I really thought I would never ever do it. So I can't even believe I'm here talking about it.
Yeah, better late than never, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So everyone have a great day or evening, depending where you are, and we'll sit down and talk again soon after your book has been published, and I've got an opportunity to read it.
You got it. And maybe maybe I can get you an early copy if that's something you'd like.
Oh, that would be amazing. I would love that. Great. Okay, we'll see you guys soon. Thanks. Bye.